You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Welcome again, Steve. How are you, man?
Thanks, I'm great. I'm excited about this conversation.
You're going to have to push me and interrupt me. I get going and then I just never stop. I've got a communication problem. So,
all right, I'll do my best.
All right, do your best. But also with us today, we've got Aishwarya Srinivasan, and I'll give you a quick introduction, Aishwarya, and then I'll let you introduce yourself. But I know that you have an MS in data science from Columbia University. I also saw on LinkedIn, yes, I do some of my research here, that you state unicorn in data science, and I want to talk about that unicorn. Welcome to the podcast. How you got here is you were highly recommended via some of the blog posts that you've written. Why don't I turn it over to you so you can go ahead and
sure. Thank you so much. I just joined the science team in IBM as a summer intern, and the experience has been completely incredible. And presently I'm dealing with some of the reinforcement learning use cases in the team. So as you know that the DSE team typically takes in customer engagements, and we have been building machine learning algorithms for them. This reinforcement learning models have been taking into account most of the financial use cases of our clients. So that's typically my flow of work.
Now, so I got to go into this. When I did the research on you, because I like to know my guests, right? You have your own website. In About Me, a couple of different things. Well, it said three things. One, a mischievous human, mischievous. I'd like to hear about it.
I would say I'm more of a person who likes to take risks, a lot of risks. I'm a person who would not look and take into account any and every constraint that come into my way. If I need to go somewhere, if I need to get something, I would do anything to get there. So that's something crazy about me.
And then it says, number 2, it says a data scientist by profession. I do want to talk about, let me save that for a second. I guess you finish with where you started, which is live life to the fullest, make a difference along the way. Sounds you you got a lot of passion for innovation, a lot of passion for data science.
Yes.
Am I right? You got a master's in data science from Columbia. I think your undergrad was more of a general computer science degree.
Yeah.
Why data science? What made you head in that direction?
I would typically say that most of my internships I used to do is in every semester break, I used to reach out to companies and get industrial work from them, because just learning from school wasn't enough for me. So I wanted industrial works, to work with different data sets, to work with different projects for me to grow personally. So with all my work, I got to work with a lot of machine learning algorithms. So that's something which got a lot of attention to me, and that's basically my initial seed for getting into data science.
So data science, how long has the data science master's program been at Columbia? I mean, how long has it existed?
It's been there for the past 5 years, and it's actually a 16-month program. I've completed 1 year of it, and I'll be graduating in December.
So you haven't, are you going to go on to a PhD?
I wanted to go into a PhD, but the thing was I just completed my undergrad and I wasn't sure if I want to get into academia for such a long time. Hence, I chose to have a master's degree, and later on in my life, if I work for a while, and then I would get into academia again to get a PhD.
When I read through your profile and as the research that I've done, it seems to be spent a lot in healthcare. Is that true, or is it also?
Healthcare is one of the recent projects which I've taken up at Columbia Medical Center. But before that, I could luckily get into a research assistantship with Professor Andreas Müller. He's one of the core developers in scikit-learn. So I would say that's one of the star work I've ever done, because not only I could work for him during the entire analysis of scikit-learn, the research assistantship was to hire me and make me work on the analysis of scikit-learn. But then he just liked my work, so that's something
So brag a little bit. What made him take notice of your work?
Just that he was expecting the work to be completed in a period of a year, and I kind of completed it in 3 to 4 months. And I used to very constantly mail him, update him. So we typically had bi-weekly meetings, but I used to mail him every day, and after every update, I used to give him a detailed detailed email about what all things have been going on, what things are going wrong, and how I have solved them. So I used to document things pretty well. He was able to have a good track of my entire work, and he probably liked the energy throughout the process. So that's something which made him think that I would be a good person to be a contributor.
Was this all during your master's degree, or was it in your last semester? So you've caught the eye of the professor. You've already essentially got the degree in hand, right? So, but you were also doing some work around streaming data, like heart rate data, blood pressure data.
Yeah, sure.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Columbia University Medical Center, that's typically a surgical department, and most of them are doctors. Some of them are teaching professors, but most of them are just surgeons. So they have a lot of data, and what they wanted to see that they weren't able to separate and categorize patients into the ones who are like critically ill and who could typically end up with an acute kidney injury, and from the ones who are like kind of normal. So they had a lot of data which was like the pre-operative data based on the electronic health records of various patients, and they had the interoperative data which was during the operation or during the surgery, and they had post-operative data which was like immediately a few hours after the surgery. So acute kidney injury is something which took a few hours of surgery and where their kidney starts malfunctioning. So they wanted a probabilistic distribution of how and when a patient is supposed to encounter this. So that was the main focus of the project, and we were trying to analyze the time series data. We were trying to analyze a lot of different forms of data. Turned out to be really interesting that not only I was working with the machine learning models I had been previously working with, but I could also understand the domain knowledge. I could understand what the data means. So that's something which gives you a lot of in-depth knowledge into the industry. So that's typically why I would say that what unicorn in data science means. When you have not only the machine learning knowledge, but you also have the industrial knowledge in each and every domain you have been working on. So which is again the same situation. Like I have been working in the financial industry and working on the reinforcement learning, how the entire process works, how the portfolio management is pictured. That's the mere reason I would say I call myself a unicorn in data science.
Thank you, Steve. But I'll turn the mic over to you for a second if you'd like.
I think I was going to head in the same direction. I mean, one of the things that I'm so curious about, I think Ali, you and Aishwarya are much more technical than I am. So I would love just a kind of intro to reinforcement learning and how it may different from supervised learning or unsupervised learning.
Yeah, and versus deep learning, machine learning, all the different learnings. I'm with you. So Aishwarya, you're really focused on reinforcement learning. So for our audience, can you explain what it is, why it's important?
So in layman terms, I would say that reinforcement learning is, of course, a very complex algorithm, but it tries to map some of the observed entities or your observation, the data which you have, to some set of actions, what you want to drive it towards. And during the process, you're trying to optimize some sort of a long-term and short-term rewards. In a very simple example, I would try to say that when a person is playing a game, what he tries to do is he tries to take different actions. For example, he tries to move the joysticks in different directions when he knows that his optimization function is to increase the points which he is getting while playing the game. And the observations are nothing but the environment in which he's playing, his position, the position of different other entities in the entire game. So that's the environment, that's the observed entities which we are looking into, and the actions are the actions which he's taking in with the joystick, and the reward is nothing but your points which you are gaining through the game. So that's like a very intuitive and simple example of what we would want to do in a reinforcement learning. On a high level basis, I would say that how it differs from a supervised machine learning is that in a supervised machine learning, you have a task driven approach. By what I mean is that you have a training data and you try to make your model learn the data. You make your model learn to do a task based on the data. And while compared to unsupervised learning, you don't have a training data, and all you try to do is try to separate, segregate, or cluster your data which you have in hand. So by that, I would say that reinforcement learning is simply trying to react to the environment based on some sort of a reward optimization.
So I know reinforcement learning has a model that surrounds it. And I think you've outlined a little bit of that model as you talk about long and short-term rewards. But can you hit that again? And then also, if you could outline how the long and short-term rewards impact and influence the next action.
Yeah. So for example, what I mean by a short-term reward is that when the person turned the joystick to say right, and he got some certain points while playing that action. But while playing that action, he probably screwed up some of the further moves. So that's the long-term reward which you would want to reward. You would also want to optimize your long-term reward by saying that if you're taking any action, how would it impact the future actions, and how would it impact your entire state, which would make you take a certain action in the future.
So the algorithm in this case would aggregate the points relative to the longer-term reaction and points therein that it's foregoing with that short-term action. So it's learning as it goes.
Aishwarya, I'm just so curious. So it's easy to understand some of this in the context of games, but when you have some system that's more complex, like the universe of banking or healthcare, how do you adapt reinforcement learning? Do you change your the tool set that you use inside of the reinforcement learning?
So
what's the
let me give you a simple example of my work at IBM. So I have been developing the reinforcement model for a trading environment, and what happens there is, for example, you have the previous stock prices and you try to learn the trend from the past n days of historical data. You try to learn about how high and how low the prices have been moving in those certain time span, and based on that you try to take an optimal action. For example, if somebody says that you take into account the previous 30 days of closing price and you compare that with your present closing price, if you see that the present closing price is at least X% higher than the previous n days of closing price, you feel that there's a higher trend and there's an increasing trend and you go for a buy. This being X% higher and taking into consideration the previous n days of data, all these are the variables which come into consideration when you're making a strategy for trading. So all these variables are auto-generated by the model, and the model itself understands about how many days it has to take into account, what percentage of increase does it have to look for when going for a buy or a sell action when it comes to a trading environment. How do you keep
from overfitting the model?
I wouldn't say there's no overfitting in the model, because reinforcement learning keeps on trying optimizing the reward function, the entire quality function. So here there's no overfitting because you're not trying to upload your data with some sort of a label.
So I don't want to turn into a stock assessment here, but the one thing, just as it relates to stock, if you're an investor, that is interesting in here, it would seem that model would be predatory as efficient market theory, meaning the market is efficient at any given time. But if you're one of the ones that don't believe in efficient market theory, which investors that may listen to us out there, that I'm not one of, I feel like, emotion drives the market all the time. Now, efficient market does work, it drives the market as well. And I presume a model of this form can't predict that human emotion piece.
I would say that I totally agree to what you're saying. So the model which we have built at IBM is not just taking into account the historical prices. There are n number of different external and alternative data which we have taken into account. So the thing is, we have put the entire model to a pattern, and we have already cleared that process. A lot about the model here, but then it's not just the historical prices. We have a lot of external data which is driving.
That's interesting to me, because kind of what you describe is a MACD or stochastics, some historical assessment tools that you can use, but this is on steroids. And it sounds like what you're doing, relative to my question, is putting some of the emotional back into it. In other words, what you see the market doing in terms of perhaps sentiment analysis, social feedback, to build that into the recommendations as well. Is that true?
We have been presenting the model to some of the clients, not the details of the model, but the high level diagram, and we shared the results. So surprisingly, some of the financial clients, they were very eager to know more about it, and we got an engagement with Credit Suisse, and I will be going there for a full-fledged presentation on 24th of this month.
Nice. Well, don't give it all away. I think if us three get together, we can go make millions over this. You know what I'm saying? Why would we give this away? So Aishwarya, talk to me about the Markov property, which says the future is independent of the past given the present. That's like a tongue twister. It's kind of
I would say in layman terms, it essentially means that if you have the information about your present state, then what you're going to derive for your future states would be just dependent on your present state and would not depend on your past. So your past would have already affected your present, right? Or your present, about your present, would be just enough for you to derive your future.
All right. So it's built in. Yeah. It's organic is what you're telling me. Are you seeing some models that are not adhering to the Markov property, by which they're looking at past analysis and making false assessments for the future because they're going back in time when they don't need to? It's already built in.
There could be a lot of models which do not follow the Markov property. For example, when you're taking into account a helicopter, then the entire trail of the helicopter's travel would definitely depend on its future. It's not just the position of the helicopter. It would also depend on where where it's originating from. So the entire trail would be dependent on a Markov process.
I'm kind of curious to dive a little bit more into open source. It sounds like you've been working with the scikit-learn library for Python. What interests you about open source, and where do you see things changing in open source as time goes on? What interests you?
So I would say the most fascinating thing about open source itself is how transparent and how easy it is to share your expertise. So, and it also like curbs out a lot of redundant work in the space. So there may be a lot of people who have already been working in a certain set of modeling and building. So it's very easy for the others who are also working in the space to reuse that part of the code, and it enables them to add on their thoughts into that part of the model. It's not just restricted for you to use a specific model which is out there. You can also add your entire thoughts. You can add your testing. You can add your innovation into that model. So that's what makes it entirely fascinating. And there's like none of the hidden states over there. There's no hierarchy. So for example, if I do not have a in-depth understanding of how a logistic regression works, I can very well open up the source code and try to understand how is it computationally working. So that's something which makes it very fascinating for computer scientists, for data scientists, and any of the other statisticians.
Is there a lot of argument about whether things should work differently in open source? Do you see a lot of conversation around new models that get put into the module and into the
there's
library?
only one thing which I kind of feel is a little restrictive when it comes to an open source, is that if you have already built a model in a certain version, for example, if you have built the entire model using scikit-learn version 18, and further in the future we have new releases, and there are a lot of things which get deprecated, there are a lot of things which get combined to the other like other parts of the submodules. So that's something which makes you refactor the entire code when you're like there's a new release of the Python library.
True. I mean, when would you use reinforcement learning? What are the best conditions, and when not to use reinforcement learning?
I would typically say that, for example, if you're going to use reinforcement learning just based on the previous stock prices, your model would not obviously perform well, because the market data which you're giving to the model is not sufficient enough for it to understand the environment. The model would still think that the environment is completely stochastic. The picture of the merger and acquisitions of the companies, it's not taking into account the stock patterns. It's not taking into account any of the earnings reports and any of the stability of the company in the market. So if you have enough information for you to create a completely deterministic space for the model, you should go ahead and use reinforcement learning. But if you do not have data which can make the model understand the environment completely on which you want to apply, then I would not really recommend using.
But is that to say the rules need to be well defined, or do you think otherwise? Do you say no, the rules don't need to be that well defined?
I would say, just for example, if you have seen Hunger Games, you do not know where the animals are going to come from. So that's something which is completely stochastic, and you do not have any information about that data. You don't have any understanding of those variables which would affect your actions, right? Which would determine what you would want to do. If you don't have that information in hand, then there's no point of using reinforcement learning, because your model is never going to understand that part of the environment. But what people generally data, so they simulate that information and then make the model learn.
Hey there, it's me. Have you rated us on iTunes yet? We love to hear feedback from all our listeners about what you love or don't love about the show. Don't worry, we can take it. We're strong. We're tough. Let us know what you think. Now, back to the podcast.
So Aishwarya, if you can net this out, because bottom line in terms of what are the three fundamentals that you have to have a great reinforcement learning model, like X, Y, and Z, what would those three things be?
I would say you should have a very well-defined observations about the environment. You should have a well-defined statements. Would have the details about what your model should take, and you should have a set of actions, the possible set of actions. But the thing is, the set of actions are not something which gets cumbersome at times. It's typically the state space, which is really hard to define. And for example, a person who is working on a stock market might not actually know the entire intricacies of what all data does drive the market, right? So that's something which is very crucial. People would know that we can do a long or short trade, but they wouldn't know the entire data set or the entire set of variables which drive the market. So I would say the most important things which you would need to build a reinforcement learning algorithm would be the set of entities which you're taking into consideration, the state space, how you're building the state space out of your entities, and the set of actions which you would want your model to take.
And I think you might have referenced this earlier. I know you've done some work in the healthcare industry around predicting kidney injury or acute kidney injury. And those would seem to be the stock market and acute kidney injury completely 180 degrees apart. What do they have in common that make reinforcement learning make the model work with both those scenarios?
I wasn't working with reinforcement learning when it was the medical data.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because there was no action space, right? We are not trying to take any actions. We're just trying to predict the probability of the patient getting the acute kidney injury. So that part of the project was nothing related to reinforcement.
So it goes back to supervised learning then?
Yeah.
All right. Very well. Okay, that makes sense then.
Given those three ideal scenarios or conditions, are there other industries or sectors or realms of inquiry that you feel like reinforcement learning has a good shot at making progress?
Okay. So I would typically say that most of the industry has still been looking into using reinforcement learning for a completely deterministic environment, where we already talked about something like chess or having an AlphaGo or various different cardboard problems. So all those things are something which have like a very deterministic state space. You exactly know how the environment would look like, and you exactly know what would happen if you take a certain action. So there's nothing stochastic in that entire scenario. So people have been using reinforcement. I would say businesses are still not in a space where they would happily adopt advanced machine learning. Reinforcement learning is still far to go. So even most of the industries, or even in finance, people haven't really adopted machine learning completely. They still rely on most of the statistical methods of doing things. So I would say it's like a long way for most of the businesses to adopt it.
Are there particular areas that you feel like could benefit in the future, even once some of the data is organized and the state space is understood?
I definitely would say yes. And there have been a lot of research which has gone into the space where you have production chains, where you have more like handling the plants, where you have like a set of specific actions, and you basically like switch on certain plants or switch off certain plants, switch on certain machineries when a typical scenario arises. So all those things are something where you would want to apply machine learning and like in specific reinforcement learning. So there have been a lot of research going on, but I'm not really sure if companies have actually adopted them, because such companies are mostly like the retail sectors, the manufacturing units, and I believe they haven't really appointed a lot of data scientists or machine learning experts out there.
I got a few questions for you personally. Like I like to end with. Before I do, Steve, any other technical questions?
No, this has been a great conversation.
First one is you're doing a lot right now, and obviously it sounds like you're about ready to finish your master's. PhD, we don't know yet, but you're getting your PhD kind of like I've done through trials and tribulations at IBM. So I understand that if you don't continue from that standpoint. But what are you most proud of at this point in time?
I would just say I'm proud of the energy. That's it.
Proud of the energy around all you're doing around data science?
The energy which I got from my mom. So she's 60 right now, and she's completely energetic. She has like, I feel that she's one of the most energetic persons I've ever met. So I believe all the energy I have is from her, and I'm really proud of that. The energy is the only thing which makes me drive forward, and which makes me think that there's no end to anything. There's no end to learning. There's no end to like anything. Like the world is going to go ahead. It's not going to stop in the next 100 years, not going to stop in the next 200 years. So it's going to go along, and you would have to like catch up with it.
So I was going to ask you the second question, but it sounds like you already answered it, and that is what drives your passion. It sounds like your mom drives your passion. She's your role model?
Yes, I would say she's my role model.
Is she a data scientist? Now that would be impressive.
She is not. She's a researcher, but she's been working in a business school in India, And she's a researcher who gets to make all the content for the students who are coming for MBA. So I would say actually she was one of the first people who made me use IBM SPSS when I was in 7th grade. So people would not have even heard about what data is, and she used to make me learn SPSS.
Wow, impressive. So that is impressive. And it doesn't surprise me you come from an academic or a learning family. That makes sense. But 7th grade SPSS,
yeah, that's impressive.
That's pretty cool. It's very cool. Did you have models that you've created at 7th, 8th grade?
No, I haven't created anything. It's just that she used to teach me everything she did. So she used to teach me things which I never understood, and I was like, what the hell is she even talking about? But
that's what us parents do. So she's done a good job. So speaking of, then, how do you learn today? How do you keep up with everything? Because it's changing fast and fast. You can get easily discouraged.
Honestly,
so how do you keep up?
To all the listeners, if you are on social media, quit. The only social media you should have is LinkedIn. Be addicted to LinkedIn. That's enough for your learning. You have like tons and tons of things out there. Read about everything that interests you. That's pretty much enough for you to like keep up with what's happening out there.
Are there any books or any any collateral that you read that you find incredibly interesting that you put at the top of the list?
The Secret. And apart from that, if you're looking into academic ones, I have a list of them, and even I have the links to the free books on my personal website. So just in case you want to look up into different domains of advanced machine learning, I have everything up on my website.
Nice. Thank you. Is there any questions that you wish I would ask that you had a good answer for that we didn't get to, or that you really think is important for us to say before we break?
I think it was like an amazing conversation. Thank you so much, everyone who joined the conversation. It was great discussing with you for like something more to come. Yeah, this was great.
Well, Steve, Aishwarya, thank you for joining me today. I think this is one of those podcasts where the learning continues, and in the sense that people can reference your website, they can reference your blogs, and continue, just like as you say. Your mom would be proud. So thank you all. I appreciate you so much for being here. I learned a lot.
Thank you so much.
Talk to you next time.
Thanks, Thanks for listening to the Making Data Simple podcast, where we make data fun. Be sure to visit IBMBigDataHub.com/podcasts to access the show notes and uncover even more great episodes. Remember, the views expressed here are those of the host and its guests and do not necessarily represent the views of IBM. Until next time, over and